can you come back? And I said, I had no life. I lived in my car. Even though I had family there, I had no life. And I love living here. So I made the choice. You want to leave your old home or develop a new one for good? And I did. Your question centered around my wife. I was here another year, and I met my wife.
You met your wife at a Kansas football game the day that Tony Sands set an NCAA rushing record, so it's got a sports connection. What was the first meeting like, and where did it go from there?
Me and Don Proctor, photographer at Fox 4, and Lori Calcara, who was a student at KU at the time. She was an intern in our sports department. She was one of the the dance girls, Crimson Girls. And so we go to the game, and pregame, an hour before kickoff, we get on the elevator, one elevator leading from the ground to the press box at Memorial Stadium in Lawrence. And my wife is the elevator. My future wife is the elevator operator. First time I saw her, I fell in love that day. I fell in love that instant. We get off the elevator. We go in the press box. And I looked at Lori, and I said, did you notice the girl on the press box? And she said, yeah, I noticed, and I noticed you noticed. So I basically watched you staring at her, a hole in her head or whatever. And I probably went up and down that elevator during the game 6 or 7 times. For some, I got to go do the elevator. And I didn't see her again for 2 months. But I went home that night, the day I met her. I went home that night. I called my brother, and I said, I met my wife today.
Really?
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So how long did it take before the feeling was mutual?
I would say it took a while. We dated, and my wife was born in Lawrence. She grew up on a farm south of Lawrence. She didn't attend KU or school, but she grew up what I would say rural.
Right.
But she lived in Lawrence at the time. I'm sorry, she lived in Overland Park.
Right.
So I saw her again, looking. This Tony Sands game we're talking about was late November. Football season was over. KU didn't bowl that year, I don't think.
Right.
And
probably not.
Probably not. Probably not. But I saw her again at a KU basketball game at late mid-January, somewhere in there. And she was working a gate where they let the student athletes in. So she that you come in and say, hey, I'm on the tennis team, and she'd check your name off. Right. You got in free, I think. And so I saw her there and talked for a minute, and then I saw her at another game less than a week later. And I said, you know what? I said, I see you at these games, and I saw you at a football game. I see you at a basketball game. I said, what if somebody wanted to contact? I'm not asking for a friend. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you at anything other than a sporting event here in Lawrence, how would they do that? How would someone get in touch with you? So I didn't come running out and ask her for her phone number. I said, how would someone get in touch with you? And she said, you know what? A good way to do that would be to go to Streetside Records in Overland Park on Sunday afternoons. She says, I got a part-time job there. I work Sunday afternoons for like 3 hours. So she wouldn't give me her phone number, but she said, let's see.
Right.
If this guy's going to show up at Streetside Records.
Right.
And sure enough, that next Sunday, I was there. Danny, she tells me to this day that I showed up, hungover, and I had on sunglasses. This is late January, early February. She said, how stupid's this guy? He's showing up I showed up with my sunglasses on. But that's the first time I saw her,
away
from Lawrence. And our first date, we went to Garozzo's. Garozzo's, Italian food.
There you go. Cool. You would eventually have 2 daughters. Talk a little bit about them.
My wife insisted, and obviously I agreed, that both our kids, would be born in Lawrence. That's how connected she was to Lawrence. And so we lived in Prairie Village for Chase in 95. My wife went into labor 11 o'clock at night. Chase was born 7 o'clock in the morning. And Cheney, we lived in Overland Park. And again, I had to drive my wife to Lawrence Memorial Hospital for that birthing. And but I only made that window by 20 minutes. So when we arrived at the emergency room, 20 minutes later, we delivered. So that was touch and go. And both kids, Chase has graduated KU, and Cheney is going to be a sophomore at KU. So my wife raised those kids to be Jayhawks, and that has turned out so far so good.
Through the years, obviously, you've covered the Jayhawks a lot. You've done just about everything in television, and it was what you described as a great girlfriend or the best woman you would ever meet as a career. Your marriage still lasts to this day. Your marriage with television lasted a very long time, too. And how would you characterize your marriage with television?
Dream job. 40 years. My first day at work in 1978 was September 8th, and I knew I knew on September 8th, 2018, 40 years later, that I'd reached that 40-year mark. Truth be told, when Frank Bowl left WDAF TV in 2009, things changed for me tremendously. Whether you could watch me on TV or not and tell or whatever. But the industry changed also. So it wasn't all Frank, or Frank's absence. But things changed for me tremendously after his departure. And another milestone was being diagnosed with prostate cancer in November of 2011. Another milestone was the spring of 2018 when my sister passed away. So there was a lot of perspective involved in all three of those events,
right,
or occurrences. But when I got to 40 years, having worked in television for 5 decades, and in the back of my mind, I always wanted at least 40 years and 6 decades, which would have been January 1st, 2020. But when I was offered a quote-unquote voluntary separation agreement, and when I look back on events of the last 9 years, this was right.
Right.
And this was my decision. I was presented an opportunity on a Thursday. I went in on my day off the next day, Friday, and accepted it before the window would have closed. But just working in television, which allowed me to do so many things, meet so many people, travel so many places. Never did I travel in television and spend what I would call a dime of my money. I'd buy souvenirs and stuff, but think about it.
Right.
The events that, we've been able to experience and see, and the people, the places, just unbelievable. Yeah, really, seriously, a dream. So many people, man, I wish I had your job. And most often I'd say, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty nice.
And you can read more about it. His new book is One for the Coyotes. We've probably only scratched the surface, although that was a big scratch we just did.
Well, appreciate that. Thank you.
One for the Coyotes. Al will be doing book signings around as well, and it's been a pleasure talking to you and being a peer all these years, Al. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome, Danny. Thanks for having me on.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Klingscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Klingscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.